So I think what we'll do today is we'll sort of, we'll try and make this a little interactive. So what I'll try and do is maybe spend about 5 minutes at the start, kind of setting some context. And then I'll take 5 minutes at the end, just to kind of close out. I'll try and leave around 30 minutes at the center for doing our interactive session. This is high risk, high reward. So I was planning on using a whiteboard, but we didn't get one. So I'll use a tool online so you can see, and I'll share the details of what I'm doing. So we'll get into the facilitation once we start, and let's say we'll keep it nice and relaxed. So as they say, there's no such thing as a stupid question. It's all good. So my name's David Anderson. I'm a practicing architect and an author of a book called The Value Flywheel Effect. I'm going to talk about Wardley Mapping your technology strategy. So kind of a bit of introduction, bit of background to myself. I did a talk yesterday where I told the story of the book, but The Value Flywheel Effect was published around 2 years ago on IT Revolution on Gene Kim's label, a publishing label, and it's kind of been seen as like a handbook for cloud modernization. And I wrote it with my two colleagues, Mark and Michael. And really we told the story of how we drove a huge kind of cloud modernization project with the company, which I'll talk about in a second. And it's really about, how do you kind of join that technology and business strategy when you're trying to really kind of bring a company forward. And there's a nice foreword written by two people, Adrian Cockcroft and Simon Wardley. Now, Adrian Cockcroft is kind of the person who brought Netflix to the cloud. He's done a lot of brilliant work in his career, and he's kind of like a really, really solid architect. And he was with AWS for many years as well as their kind of VP of architecture. And Simon Wardley created the Wardley Mapping technique, which I use quite extensively, and that's what we'll go through today. Just a bit of background on why the book came about. About maybe 10, 11 years ago, around 2013, I was working for Liberty Mutual. Liberty Mutual, a large US insurance company. They're around a $40 billion company, Fortune 100, and I was in a CTO position in Ireland. And we kind of had this sort of perfect storm of, we had the desire to go, how do we be more customer centric? How do we go into cloud native development, like full public cloud? And how do we bring kind of agility to the whole enterprise? And we did these three changes at the same time, which I would not recommend. Maybe one at a time. So this actual quote is from an Amazon case study that I helped write on telling our story. So really the problem I found myself is in 2013, I thought, as we move to public cloud, how do we write software differently? What's our different technology strategy? And at the time, I had been following Simon Wardley and trying to figure out this mapping strategy. And I kind of realized that all my peers, like as technical leaders, like security people, architect people, infrastructure, I was the only real kind of software guy in that group of technical leaders. And I thought we need to write software completely differently. So I came up with this idea of this serverless first approach. And it was a very bold and courageous kind of idea from someone sitting in Belfast, away from head office. Can we turn this large incumbent 100-year-old insurance company into a serverless first enterprise? Completely change the thinking. And that's what we kind of did. So why serverless? It's actually not about serverless. Some of the things that I started, and this is like the strategy that I came up with, I could see we were very slow in releasing our software. Reliability was an issue, predictability. Costs were spiraling. We were maybe spending like $50,000 a year to host a simple static website. It was crazy. This was on-prem. So how could we completely change the FinOps mindset? And this was before FinOps was a term. Scalability. With something like an insurance company, every now and then there'll be like a natural disaster where everyone hits the servers at the same time. So we need that real scalability that you get from the cloud. And engineer confidence. We wanted engineers to experiment, to move fast, to build well, to be able to innovate. And that was I would say, the problem set that we were dealing with. And it happened that in 2014, Amazon came out with Lambda. I thought, this is interesting. This is a very different way of a paradigm shift, how we think about compute. So lots of things like speed to market, lower your TCO, scalability, a lot of these things. So I wouldn't say we went looking for this solution. We had a problem and we were figuring out how do we kind of solve it. And really that's when I thought about modernization. It's when you move to the cloud, there's certain things that you're after. Like you always say, you migrate to the cloud, and then I say, then you modernize, because it's the second step. You know, just moving to the cloud. And what and I'll talk about AWS primarily, but it's exactly the same for other cloud providers too. AWS talk about the line of shared responsibility. And initially you often think, well, if I move my data center to the cloud, I'll use their data centers. I'll use their location in, you know, US East 1, in EU West or whatever. And now I have someone else runs the data center. Now, if you only do that, all you really get is a really nice data center that you're not allowed into, that you have no access to. So that's the initial line that many organizations draw. But there's a higher line, which I call that modern. We start to offload more work, more operational burden to the cloud provider, which is like compute, storage, database. Instead of standing up my own compute platform, I'll just use Lambda. Instead of installing my own database, I'll just use Dynamo or RDS. So I start to use managed services more, and then I can focus on the higher order things. Because, you know, if you're not in the business of being infrastructure, why not? Like, why get involved with all that? So that was the kind of the mindset that I was thinking through. So then let's think about how Wardley Mapping comes into that. And I'll explain. I have 2 or 3 slides to explain the kind of concept. Is anyone familiar with Wardley Mapping? Good, maybe about a third. So a few slides just to explain the kind of the format. So I'd say as a basic, a Wardley map is a way of sort of strategically visualizing like what you're doing. So I've kind of got a value chain here. So you think of the anchor, right? So let's say for this conversation, say the anchor is a CEO or a board member. And then maybe their question is, what do I need from technology in my company? So what's the technology offering? So this kind of horizontal value chain is visible. So for the CEO, maybe there's initial need to provide global service. We've got customers in North America, in Europe, and Asia, or maybe Australia. So I have 3 different regions I need to provide service to. It's going to be too expensive to build 3 data centers. Maybe I can use the cloud for that global scale. So that's the initial need. So then you got to think about, well, that depends on public cloud. I can't just use like a virtual offering, like near my office. I'll need to go for a global scale. To do that global scale, you need some kind of modular architecture. So maybe we need to think differently about how we architect our system. And then maybe you think about, well, we need to think about some SaaS kind of fundamentals around tenancy and maybe microservices, how I get kind of stateless. So the CEO actually doesn't care about microservices. He or she is not going to care about, I don't really care how you do this. I just want my service to be fast in North America, Europe, and Australia. That's all I really care about. I don't really care. You often hear, you technical guys figure out how you make that happen. I just want global service. So that's the value chain. The things at the top are very visible to this anchor stakeholder. The things at the bottom are less visible. So then the horizontal, this is the interesting axis, the evolutionary axis. There's 4 kind of phases, and for each of these kind of capabilities. Genesis is something that's kind of brand new. Like this is like the wondrous. It's like Gen AI was 2 years ago. How does this even work? It's kind of magic. This is so exciting. It's like everyone's kind of in awe of a Genesis thing. Custom is kind of like, okay, now we understand this thing. We can see the value. I think we can build it, but we're not quite good at it yet. We're getting better at it. When something moves over to product, you're getting into, okay, there's now customer demand for this. We need to have this. This is important. We're going to start like this is now, we have to have this in our business. And then commodity is, this is no longer, a differentiator. This is just the cost of doing business. So you can see Gen AI started probably here 2 years ago, and I'd say it's probably around here at the minute. It's not quite commodity yet, but it will be. You can talk about compute. When people first started to put computers in the business, it was kind of Genesis. If you think in the 60s, there was like newspaper articles of the bank have got a computer. It was like on the, it was this kind of, it was news, this wondrous. Then it became custom in the 70s. There's lots of different types of manufacturers for computers. Then it became product with the kind of Microsoft or mainframe era where there was kind of standardization. And now it's commodity. It's the cost of doing business. Nobody really asks you where you get your compute anymore. It's just they assume that you get it from somewhere. So those are the three things. This value chain is these kind of components. There's like think of it depends. They all depend on each other. The vertical axis is visibility and the horizontal is evolution. And we'll stick with this example of like, what does the CEO expect from their technology strategy? So why do we need this way of visualizing like a strategy? And again, Simon Wardley came up with this kind of thinking probably 15 years ago. And he, as a CEO for a company, he eventually got the CEO position and he realized there was no strategy. So he read it was The Art of War and a few other things, and he thought of this is how we think about strategy. So one thing about, if you think of like a 2x2, like a SWOT analysis, there's no movement. This is a strength, this is a weakness, this is a threat, this is opportunity. There's no kind of movement in that picture. So maps provide movement. It's a limited context. If you see a vision statement or one, it's like this is what we're going to do. There's no kind of narrative. There's no evolutionary element to that. There's no thinking about what are the climatic patterns around our problem area. You assume stability. One thing about maps is if I know something like, say, microservices was a very new thing back in maybe 10, 15 years ago, I would have had it over here because it's quite novel. You've got to go and read what Sam Newman says about it. Like, where do I put my database? There's all these questions. Now, like, we pretty much understand microservices. There's lots of patterns. It's well understood. So it's evolved to the right. So one thing about mapping is you can be sure everything either evolves to the right or just dies, just stops. So it's not a matter of saying when it evolves. It's what will I do when this evolves. So there's one thing about map is there's movement. There's no one size fits all. So sometimes a strategy is simplified for slides. When you see a presentation of a strategy, it's quite simplified and the context is lost. And finally, a lot of strategies text-based. You'll read like a PRD or a PRFAQ, and you kind of it's your own kind of thinking of what that is. But a map kind of provides more basis for conversation. What's the benefit for me? You get a real. I've done this with teams of architects where we get a holistic view of the organization. You really think about what are we trying to do. You see dependencies. A lot of the lower level dependencies are hidden. This is where you kind of get the value. There's always something sitting over here that's really important. You think, why is that thing over there? Why not move this over to the right? Like, why are we creating a custom logging framework? What's the benefit of doing that? And usually it's like, well, it was really fast to do at the time, but it's become an anchor. You can anticipate future movement. When this thing moves, we'll then do this. You can talk about really complicated concepts with a map. Like, what happens? Like, should we move? Like, is this the right thing to do? Is that the right thing to do? So and for me, what's really important, I think, for architects and stakeholders, you build that kind of shared mental model. So I'll come back to this, but how I started with this technique was just start with a technology strategy. How are we actually going to move to public cloud, or how do we meet our need? So myself, actually Mark and Michael, we just sat on a whiteboard, figuring out how to map, just trying stuff. So you've got those handouts. Even that process through that canvas is good to even sit and do that. Remember, this isn't like a scientific model. It's just a sharing of minds. So it's not precise. Sometimes people say, well, should that be 2 or 3 pixels over to the right? It doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? The big decision is this in commodity or is this in custom? That's the kind of level you want to think about. What I find when you're mapping is that, and we'll kind of try and demonstrate this, it should be facilitated well. Like, every kind of contribution, every suggestion is worth exploring. And it's really about what's the learnings. If you sit and do a mapping session for 30 or 60 minutes, think about after, say, what did we learn? What was interesting? Was that a good conversation? And I'll tell you, it almost always is. So let's start into it and see how we go now. So I make a fool of myself. So I've kind of handed out this canvas, which will not do the whole canvas. This was created by a guy called Ben Mosur, which is brilliant. And if you're starting from your map, you can start from these steps from 1 to 6. Now what we'll do is we'll just fast forward to 6. So usually say, like, what's our purpose? So for this demo, we'll say, let's think about the technology strategy for my organization. And we'll not pick on one organization for this example. We'll kind of have a generic. I don't want someone to say, I work for Microsoft and my CEO says we need to do this. Let's not name names. So we'll just kind of, we'll kind of generalize. Think about the scope. The scope is the technology strategy for this company. It's not the technology strategy of all companies or for industry. It's for this company that we're talking about. Who are the users? Like who will benefit from this thing we're mapping? In this example, it's probably going to be the CEO or the board. It's not the manager or the CIO. It's probably up at the CEO or board level. What's their needs? This is the thing that we'll start the conversation at this point. What's the immediate need? And I usually find maybe picking like 2 or 3 things is enough to get started. Like you might list 10 needs, just try and narrow it down to 2 or 3 things. And then you start building your value chain and you start mapping. Now, if you want to draw along on this canvas, go for it. I'll not ask to look at it. If you want to come up afterwards, we can have a quick conversation. I'm happy to do that. But we'll just kind of scribble along for your own company if you want to kind of draw along. So what we'll do now for the embarrassing interactive part. So there's a great tool called Online Wardley Maps. I'll just leave that there if you want to grab a photo. So this is an online tool. I think a guy in Manchester put this together. It's a free tool. Just open it in your browser and you can sit. There's a thing called Maps as Code. If you're, I always find it's better to start drawing by hand. But if you want to actually write something up, you can do it in Lucid or Miro. But this is quite a nice format. And I'll demonstrate this now as we're working through. It's also got a nice usage part where you can see there's a, let me see now. There's like a kind of a DSL language where you can like define these things, which I'll not go through it in detail. You'll probably see as I'm doing it what that is. But if you want to have a look, we'll go back. Okay. So what I always use is VS Code. There's a nice plugin for VS Code that you can sit and I'll kind of demonstrate this as we go. So this is where you get embarrassing. So what I want to do is just ask people for suggestions and we can kind of, so how about this for kind of ground rules? If you've got a question about the process, just please put your hand up and we'll take the question. But otherwise we'll just go back and forward and I'll kind of repeat what we're saying. So let's think of a CEO for a fictional company. And that CEO, let's just say it's a moderate sized company. What do you think their needs are from their technology strategy? If you shout out, I'll not embarrass you. To make revenue, okay. So let's add that in. So we can maybe say increase revenue. Okay. So we put that in as a component. Any other suggestions? So support that strategy. So assuming they have a strategy, they support that strategy. So maybe there is about maybe communicating and maybe socializing the strategy. So maybe say, let's say, I'll put that as in socialize. Sorry? Oh, let's see. Yeah, I'll try and zoom out of it. Is that okay? Okay, that's right. Time to market, yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so let's have 3 in there. So what I would usually do is probably have three there. So I'll just tidy up the DSL here. So what you normally do is you can click on the map and enter something, a component quickly, and then use this little DSL on the right here to kind of tweak it slightly. So let's say, so I'd say increased revenue is probably something that I would say is of high value. So let's put that to the right. Socialized strategy is probably something that we'll maybe just put that here, say. And time to market is, I think, probably more emerging things. So maybe we'll pop that over there. So that what we'll then do is we'll link these. It's always live coding, it's good fun. So let's think of what do you think these things depend on? So let's take maybe time to market. We'll do that one first. So what do you think, if you're a CEO and you want to increase time to market, what do you think that would depend on? Let's think of 2 or 3 things. Cycle time. So let's say, yeah. So what about? Yeah. Let's see. Let's say. Let's say short lead time. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Anything else? Prioritization, that's a good one. I'm going to say clarity of purpose. I'm going to be cheeky and steal a phrase from the book. Yeah, that's a good one. I'll at the end I'll pause. So if you want to take a photograph of this and the code, I'll kind of show you at the end. So where we get to. Do you want to have? Well, that's probably enough to get started. Let's see. So I'm going to go time to market. Let's link that to short lead time. Incidentally, I found that Copilot and Code Whisperer are actually quite good at auto-suggesting the map, which blew my mind. It's like any AI. It's not. It's incorrect, but it's a nice kind of shortcut. So usually when I initially map, I'll try and keep it fairly small and fairly tidy. Like not try and put loads of components on, because you could go really wide and end up with like 30 things and just confuse yourself. I like to keep it fairly narrow at the start. So let's think of something like short lead time. What do you think that depends on from your team? So now you're starting to get from what the CEO wants as time to market to, and usually when you're mapping things like time to market, if somebody comes in fresh to this room now, they'll say, what do you mean by time to market? We kind of understand, we have a shared understanding of what we mean by time to market. So probably at the end, we may come in and fix up some of the labels. So short lead time, what do you think that depends on? Release cadence, yeah. So I'd say release cadence, yes, but I would probably maybe it's more like continuous deployment or continuous delivery, because it's, I think, so it's kind of whip. So maybe there's 2 things there I want to call out is, so low whip. Oh, sorry. So let's say, and then maybe we'll say, do you want to go with continuous delivery or continuous deployment? Yes. Delivery. Let's go delivery. Sorry? Yes, public cloud. Yeah. Could be. It doesn't have to be, but it's. So let's think about the positioning. At the start, I don't worry too much about the positioning. I just try and lay it out. So let's say I would probably, if I have 2 components like that, I would probably say which is more accepted, or which is the more novel or advanced technique, and which is the more accepted. So I think I would say low whip is probably more. It's probably better to understand low whip. Continuous delivery, I say, is a bit more advanced. So I'd probably put continuous delivery to the left. So let's see now. Let me just figure that out. I might put, I don't think continuous delivery is as easy as people say it is. So I'm going to maybe put it slightly to the left. Oh, 35. There, I'll put it there. Okay. Let's maybe shall we take continuous delivery? That's an interesting one. What do we think that depends on? infrastructure as code. So let's say something like automated deployments. It's okay. Good luck doing continuous delivery if you don't have automated deployments. Anything else? Decoupled architecture, yeah. Let's say, shall we say maybe modular architecture. I think I don't usually I think if I was doing a model, we'd spend a lot of time thinking about naming. You know, with this, we tend to go relatively quickly and get the concepts and find the shape of it. So feel free if you want to sort of sketch on the paper, if there's other ideas that you have, or even if you want to copy the shape of this. And as you can see, the way I'm sort of laying it out here to the left, it's kind of like components, relationships. What I'll probably do is time to time, I'll go back and tidy this up. But again, it's like no one's going to code review this, so it doesn't really, as long as it's fairly it's not too messy afterwards. You can also put comments in. This here you can say like, high level needs. You can comment the DSL on the left there. Okay, so let's think of something like automated deployments. Let's pick one for each. What do you think automated deployments depends on? Testing, that's a brilliant one, yes. Automated, I'm going to say verification. I'm starting to say verification instead of tests. And a second one for automated deployments? Artifact management. So it's version. So it's probably yeah, it's probably artifact promotion. Yeah. So let's say package management. So I'm going to actually put that more to the. That's probably better understood. I still think, having been testing for many years, I understand it's not easy at all. It's getting more difficult. That's a whole talk within itself. Automated deployments. Okay, and do you want to pick out a few dependencies for modular architecture? So what does modular architecture depend on? Yeah, so it's probably, so I'm going to be biased and say DDD. It's domain-driven design. That's my bias. But that could be, good, alignment between product and engineering. There's lots of different kind of ways you could describe that. But I find that if you do your domain-driven design well, you could have potentially have a nice modular architecture. Anything else? So what architectural pattern do you think you would use for modular architecture? Microservices, yeah. So let's say, I'll say microservices here. Oh. I don't know why I decided to do this live. Okay. And usually I'll just kind of tweak the layout just to make it readable. Okay. So let's pause there for a second. Does that kind of approach people, does that make sense? Any questions on the approach or high-level questions? Would you take a quick pause? Yes?
So if for my company the microservices is still like a custom theme?
Yes.
Should I put it there, or do you have like the tech?
Yes, so that's a great question. So if let's say in this company, no one really has practices domain-driven design, right? It's brand new. So let's say like domain-driven design. If you think of like Eric Evans has been around for 20 years, but there's some companies that it's a brand new idea. So let's say we could probably move that right over. So the question was, if microservices is new to my company, where should I put it? So let's say domain-driven design is over here because it's a brand new idea. And some of the engineers have heard of microservices. One or two have actually worked on microservices in the previous company, but this company have never done it before. So even though it's a fairly well understood concept in the industry, this company has not done it. So this is a map for this company. So let's move that over, say around here, because it's still quite custom built. And again, so it's like, like let's call it pretend company Inc. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sequence matter because in order for us to get a short lead time delivery, we need to work with modular architecture microservices kind of pattern so that we can feed them into a continuous delivery pipeline.
Yes. Yeah. So the question is, does the sequence matter? That you could have, there's maybe dependencies within the map. Usually I would think of this as what's the maturity of the capability? It's not really the process. Like you could think of this in a process view. I need to sequentially, I need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But this could be, does this capability depend on that capability? You can also have maybe joins. So let's see if there's an extra join here we haven't spotted. So you could say there that continuous delivery also depends on automated verification. Well, sorry, we have that dependency already. I wouldn't worry too much about having every single relationship on the map, because sometimes it'll look like a spider's web. When you want to just have clear value chains. That's a good question. Okay. Yes.
So it makes a lot of sense for the things about things like socialized strategy. How do you put that in a column? What's the
So what I might think, I want to show some analysis. So I'll just sort of say what I would think. I would maybe think of, I might think of sort of like, I'll say document, as in document strategy. That sounds quite straightforward, but it's not always done well. And that document strategy could be in slides, in a video, in a document, whatever that is. And then you might say, well, once we document the strategy, let's maybe have a sort of a developer conference to kind of celebrate, maybe like a big open space or something. So you might say that document strategy is pretty, we should be able to do that. Maybe it hasn't been done. So the map might actually call out the fact that we have a really cool strategy, but we've never actually written it down. And that might lead to the next step. Well, do people actually know what it is? And maybe we need to take a day off, like a developer conference or an open space, and actually discuss it. So it doesn't need to be, maybe it could be things that we think we could do. You might think from a strategy perspective, that's pretty straightforward. That's not rocket science, but maybe this company has not done that. So it's even good if we were a few leaders in the company talking about it, we'd say, well, do we actually want to do this? Should we document the strategy? So sometimes the map can show very obvious things that haven't been done yet. Yes.
So do you have any recommendations for kind of the first iterations? How wide should you go? Because here you kind of 2 or 3 and then you continue. Right? But if we do it really wide.
So I would tend to keep it around this sort of shape. So the question was how wide should you go in kind of real life? I would try and stay at this kind of level, because we could have started this conversation by what are the needs of the CEO. We could have written a list of 20 things, you know, and that just has a lot of needs. So I would almost shrink that down to 2 or 3 and then go down one value chain that you think is the most important. So you're almost prioritizing which you think is the most interesting one. And we may decide here that there's 3 different maps. There's a map for time to market. There's a separate map for socialization strategy. And there's a separate map for increased revenue. Do you know what I mean? Because I think if you have one map with lots of components, it just becomes too hard to see. And you'll see in the next phase what we'll kind of do now, how that would be hard with a very busy map. If that makes sense? Yeah, totally. You push through to kind of try and get a single narrative and then go back and explore the next narrative. So there's a bit of exploration at the start to kind of almost find what's the area of interest and then kind of go down that. We may end up go down an area of interest and it's like a rabbit hole. And then you could potentially say, well, we could say, do you know something? This bit wasn't that important. So let's drop that back off the map. Do you know? So you can you continually adjust as you go to find out what's the important thing. So I want to show what you might do with that map now. Any final kind of questions before? Yes?
Sorry, I'm really new to the Wardley Map thing, so I'm just trying to understand at what level in the organisation are you doing this? Because I can understand a CEO with his management team saying, I want to increase my time to market by 80%. And the team's then showing you, we don't even have the services so I don't have to rethink.
Yes.
We won't achieve 80% this year. We need to be realistic and talk through that. But at what level are you doing this? Because if every team within a domain starts doing this, I just see chaos.
It's crazy. Yeah. So the question is, at what level would you do this within a company? It's a great question. I think you can do it at all levels. But for this particular map, I'm thinking this is probably a map that I would do biased with a few architects. You know, I'm not sure I would have the CEO in the room while I'm doing this exercise. I would know what their need is maybe from a town hall or a presentation. We'd say the CEO has been talking about time to market. How can we, and it's really about connecting the dots, the theme for the conference, connecting the dots from the CEO's need down to, as an architecture team, what are the things that we should go after? And can we connect the dots from that down? That's the thing I think is often missing. Do you know what I mean? Is teams will obsess with automated testing. The CEO wants time to market, but no one ever makes that connection. So you're really it's about like, what are the techniques we think is going to make a difference and what are the top level strategies and how do we join those dots and make that really clear what those joins are. I wouldn't be too, if everyone diverges, I think you have a problem. You know, but you want to have what's the small number of things you think you can really move the needle to hit that high level strategy. So it's more about connecting the dots. But you could, if you were doing this at a team level, there might be less around kind of this area here. And you might go straight into how do we do our automated verification. And you might go deeper on that one thing. But you can do it at multiple levels, but it depends where the focus is. Okay, so let's apply a few different things here. So what we might do here is I'll take an example here. So what I'd often think of, you'd maybe think of something like, I'll drop this down a bit. So you might look at this and say, is there something here that's really a key sort of capability that can really transform this organization? And you might think we should actually evolve the DDD capability. So let's try and evolve that over to be maybe like custom. So if we were to move DDD over, how would we do that? You might say, well, let's get, maybe there's some people at this event, let's get them in and we'll do like a training session. You know, I was at a great talk yesterday by a guy, Martin, and he does a lot of DDD training. So let's get some training, let's rethink that. Let's try and move that capability so it's more understood and better accepted. If we move the DDD capability, that will then potentially move like our kind of modular architecture. So you start to see almost like impacts kind of going up, if you know what I mean. we'll see something like that. So you maybe see what are the key things we could move that will actually, potentially move our time to market. There's almost like I'll kind of short circuit it slightly here to show you the shape of it. Do you know what I mean? You kind of look at the lower level things. Say, if I move that, there's almost a cascading effect back up the ways. Another thing which I find really interesting is you'll find there's areas. You'll find of some of the things on the right on this map, like we as a company understand pretty well. There's these things on the left. I would call these, it's almost like pioneering behavior. So you might say, like, if we take if we identify a couple of things, like let's say. We might see this here. It's what I would call pioneering behavior. So our strategic focus should be in this kind of set of capabilities. So we know that should be our strategic focus for next year. So I know we're almost in time now. That kind of makes sense as an exercise. So I'll just kind of show you very quickly. If you want to grab a photograph of that now's the time. And then I'll just close up in 2 or 3 minutes. So what you can do as well is you can take this code here and drop it into this tool, which gives you the same map. That's in the browser. So I can then hit save and share, and we can share that around. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll actually just save that. And there's like a clone URL. So anyone can sit and look that up. I would share it, but I haven't thought of a way to share that quickly. Maybe I'll try and post that or something on I'll post that on my Twitter account, which I'll share at the end. So it's a really nice way of sharing that. Let's see now. So in closing, hopefully that you get a sense of how we do that. The map that really kind of the map that really clicked with me when I was doing a lot of this stuff was a map that I looked at around 10 years ago. We talked about for your application, like your cloud strategy, go back to how you think about architecture best practice and high MTTR. That was the initial map. And this was a map that Simon had done. He added this thing that once you move to cloud and DevOps and move to serverless, you can then think about what's your emerging practice. So the stuff on the top left becomes your emerging capability. Because as engineers, we'll obsess over DevOps, cloud, we'll really obsess in here, we'll spend all our time in here when the exciting thing is actually up here. So, and this, for myself and a few colleagues, this map really resonated. And the thing that this little piece here, like as developers, we constantly in a battle about, is it, what type of infrastructure as code should we use, what language, which are good discussions, but the war is up here. So we get this idea, we used to laugh and say, there's a big line that maybe doesn't matter, is a bit extreme, but like these things are important, but this will make or break our business. So definitely as technical leaders and architects, we should be thinking about this stuff as well as this and thinking about that whole value chain. So that was a map that really changed, and that map is in the book as well. Not all maps need to be perfect. That was a very early sketch I had done a long time ago. Sometimes you'll start off with on a whiteboard, just mapping out capabilities, connect them together. It doesn't need to be perfect. You'll often see Simon post a finished map. It looks brilliant. The way he creates those maps is very messy. There's a lot of scribbling and drawing out, so don't be afraid to get kind of messy. That's one of the maps I had from the book, which kind of shows something similar. If we're trying to really kind of enable an engineer, when you break down all this stuff, if you can have, like we talked about throughput, if you have high door throughput, and how do we enable that? And how do we, some architecture patterns that create guardrails? So this was part of the strategy in Liberty Mutual. We thought if we can increase throughput and give people good patterns, then that will have a cascade effect the way up. And this was an actual map we used in a Fortune 100 company. So again, there's that tipping point, and we talked on that map we just drew together. Maybe there was a tipping point around DDD, in my bias. That was a map I drew in 2015 when we were kind of figuring out this technology strategy. As you can see, really messy, drawn on a white wall in an office in Belfast. This kind of helped us make sense of all the different things we could see in the company. So it's a brilliant technique, definitely something that I've found useful. There's a lot more content on this website called learnwardleymapping.com. It's a guy called Ben Masur, and he's the guy that created the canvas here. So I definitely would look up that. And there's lots of, like, Ben's a brilliant teacher, and he's got lots of videos, etc. So I would definitely recommend having a look at that site. And I'll not go into that. That's just some of the...
You're out of time.
I'm out of time, yes. So that's the flywheel in the book, and that's the book. All right? Thanks very much.